So, hi everyone. My name's Althea Davies. I'm a paleoecologist and environmental geographer at the University of St Andrews. And this series of 4 webinars was something that emerged from discussions that we've had with other paleoecologists within the British Ecological Society. But fortunately, I guess because quite a lot of paleoecologists are also in geography schools, we felt that there was a really good opportunity to combine forces with others who work more in geography to put together a series of free webinars to think about the use of virtual technologies to kind of bring the classroom into the field and to erode the boundary between doing fieldwork in the classroom and in the field. So our aim for the 4 webinars is that it's suitable for anyone, whether you're teaching, doing science communication, whether you feel like you're experienced at it or pedagogy is new to you. And for that reason, the webinars are sort of starting with first principles, I guess, in this session to think about, what is a virtual field trip? How does it compare with or differ from planning an in-person field trip, and then what sort of technologies can we make use of, and those increase in tech, I guess, tech capacity and complexity through the webinars, to finish with a workshop thinking about how do we evaluate how well we're doing by using digital tools to support field-based learning. And none of this is to replace in-person fieldwork, but we recognized when you've got big classes, financial constraints, there are many reasons why running field classes are becoming much harder. So we're aiming to keep this quite informal. We're planning to record the sort of taught component of each webinar, but either at the end of the taught component, or maybe sometimes, as you'll see today, within it, there will be interactive elements where we hope that you'll feel able to share your questions, your experience, maybe things that you think might work or things that haven't worked as well as you'd hoped. Or like me, you're looking for confidence that some of your ideas might not be completely ridiculous, and that you can learn from others who are trying similar things, or in my case, I'm sure people will be doing much more advanced ideas than I've tried so far. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Mostly you'll be muted. You're welcome to turn your camera on or not, as you prefer. Hopefully you'll feel confident to do that if there's a chance for us to do some more asking questions and having a bit more discussion. But for now, I think I'll hand over to Naomi Holmes and Liz Hurrell, who are going to lead today's session.
Thanks, Althea, and thanks everyone for joining. And just up on the slides, which hopefully you can still see at the moment, we've just got the webinar series here, so you can see the 4 webinars that Althea was referring to and sort of when they are, and you can get them into your diary. So today, really, we're going to be talking, as Althea said, about what is virtual fieldwork, so kind of starting at the beginning. But I would firstly like to thank Althea for organising this and for being the driving force behind this webinar series. And as Althea's already mentioned, we've got an interdisciplinary team leading these sessions. So I'm a paleoecologist by background, now teaching in geography and education departments. And you'll meet lots of people over the next few weeks who have interdisciplinary and some similarities, some differences in their background. So it's great that we've got these sessions that have been sponsored and supported by the British Ecological Society and the Royal Geographical Society's Geography and Education Research Group. So today, Liz and I are going to be doing some talking, and hopefully you'll be doing some talking as well. But I'd also like to acknowledge that there's a lot of work that's been going on in our field by many other colleagues, some of whom are here today, some of whom will be leading sessions in the future, and some who aren't. And so there's lots of people who've contributed to discussions, to work, to practical examples, to supporting each other with this work over the last number of years. And today we're going to be starting the session, or or the series of 4 sessions by thinking about what is a virtual field trip. And we're aware that we're likely to have attendees from a range of disciplines, and we'll hopefully find out a little bit more about those in a minute, but also with different experiences or knowledge of virtual fieldwork or virtual field trips. And we'll might know a little bit about these, we might know nothing, or we might have extensive years of producing these and sharing our knowledge with other people. So some people have been using field trips, virtual trips, as part of their teaching and learning activity for many years, but for many others, the COVID-19 pandemic really pushed them to move from taking students outdoors to, as I like to say, learning about the outdoors indoors. So using virtual methods to allow students to get fieldwork learning experiences and to continue to meet those learning outcomes that we set when we develop a kind of standard outdoor fieldwork or field trip, learning outside the classroom. And so many colleagues were preparing virtual field learning at short notice in order to support the learning of students who had been anticipating going off to many different outdoor locations and learning about different things in these different settings, and who were then finding themselves in their bedrooms or their houses or wherever they were learning about the field work that they'd been expecting to do outside. And in many cases, there was no real training for staff. I remember my experience of this. I was meant to be heading off to Amsterdam and instead found myself exploring Amsterdam on Google Earth, putting together various trips for different groups of students. And so in some cases, there wasn't much time to consider the pedagogy. It was a kind of, we need this and we need this yesterday. So it was a case of putting together something without much consideration. If we think about pedagogy, it's thinking about the methods and practices of teaching. So we were doing it in a totally different way to how we'd done it before, but without much time to consider how we might be doing it. And sometimes, particularly from students maybe, but also from some staff, we might see that the focus was on producing really visually appealing field trips. So really high-tech trips, but sometimes the learning side of things, the pedagogical side of things was a little bit lost or maybe thought about kind of as the next step. And so we want to think about today and over these series of webinars, how when we've got time to prepare our virtual field trip, so we're not doing it for something we needed last week, how when we've got that time, what we might need to consider in terms of pedagogy, and how we might think about preparing for these virtual field trips. So that's the kind of purpose of today's webinars, and then the webinars as you move through the series become more practical, taking you through those stages of once you've thought about what you need for it, how do you actually create those trips? So just as a kind of bit of an icebreaker, it would be really nice to learn a little bit about you. Before we do that, I will hand over to Liz so Liz can introduce herself. And then once Liz has introduced herself, if we can think about, you don't need to think about who you are, you know who you are, but if you could pop who you are in the chat, maybe your discipline, the types of field work that you might normally do, how you might consider how you might want to use virtual field trips or how you might have used them in the past. So just a couple of sentences about yourself and sort of why you're here today. But I'll hand over Liz to introduce herself now.
Thanks, Naomi. So yeah, hi everybody, and it's really nice to see so many people here. Yeah, I'm Liz Hurrell. I'm senior lecturer at the University of York, and I am also a paleo environmental person, or my PhD was looking at reconstructing past environments using diatom isotopes. But increasingly, I've moved over to sort of environmental education with an interest in sort of virtual field trips. That since sort of the pandemic, I guess. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what you your backgrounds and where you all come from in the chat box when you've had a chance to respond.
Cool, thanks Liz. So just give you a couple of minutes just to have some thoughts about who you are, why you're here, and what your interests in virtual fieldwork are. So I'll shut up and leave you in peace for a couple of minutes. Okay, quite a few people have introduced themselves. We'll keep an eye on the chat as we continue as well, if people want to add anything as we go on. But we've got a nice range of disciplines and experiences, different educational stages as well. So I think that between us, as we move into some of the activities later on, I think there'll be a really nice range of ideas and thoughts feeding into some of the activities that we'll be doing. So we said at the start we thought there'd be an interdisciplinary room, and it's turned out that that's right. So that's really great to see that. So I'll try and keep up with the chat as we move through and read through people's introductions, because it's great to see who's been able to attend today. And as well as in your introductions, as well as introducing yourself, we've got a lot of reasons why people are coming, and the kind of specific areas that they're interested in. And hopefully you'll find over the series that attending these webinars, or if you can't attend them, being able to catch up with them will help you to kind of reach your ambition that you've popped within the chat. So really moving back to the beginning, so to speak, we started off by asking you, what is virtual fieldwork? Just to put any words or thoughts or anything that you had associated with virtual fieldwork into the Mentimeter. I'll see if the Menti link is still in my able to be pasted in. So I've just popped that in there again. And we'll just give you a couple of minutes just to add, your thoughts to that. So I will see if I can set a timer for 2 minutes. Hopefully you can still see that on the screen. I'm in a browser version of Zoom, so it's a bit different to normal. And if you just add any thoughts that you've had about virtual fieldwork onto the screen, and at the end of the 2 minutes, they'll be revealed. So last 10 seconds before the great reveal. Okay, so we're all seeing these together for the first time, so we'll just read through these, see if we can pick up any themes that are coming through. If you pick up on anything that I've not picked up on, please do pop it in the chat, or just shout out and draw our attention to it. So we've got digital coming up, so digital representations, exploring the field digitally, doing field work remotely or away from the field. We've got lots of that in here. Second, using the digital as the field, which could be secondary data, so bringing in some element of the data that students might not be collecting during the field. We'll come back to this one here. So taking part online and remotely, and it not being hands-on. That's something that we might have a bit of a chat about later on when we think about different types of virtual fieldwork. But it certainly can be less hands-on, but there are ways of integrating different activities into virtual fieldwork. Thinking about how we might represent the sites, thinking about 360-degree photographs, or whether we're using videos, sounds, different types of things like that. time consuming but rewarding. Yes. More inclusive. So we've got in here people talking about EDI, so talking about equity, diversity and inclusion, thinking about how it might be inclusive and more supportive, and also thinking about how, we've got a few people here suggesting it could be preparatory, so maybe people might want to use it before actually going to visit a site, and we've got that here as well. Good way to introduce students to places and enhance confidence. Coming back again to digital resources, 360-degree imagery as well, and simulation of fieldwork. And then we've got in here based on real world data and methods, and being able to engage with these issues. So some really, really good thoughts there, showing the kind of breadth, variety of what we think. And if we merged all of those together, I think we'd get a really nice and thorough definition of what we think virtual fieldwork is. And we're going to move on now to thinking about why we might need virtual fieldwork. And we'll just pop a minute on this one, because some of you have come up with some ideas already. So we'll give you a minute just to see what you might pop on here, because there will be a bit of repetition. And after that, we can have a look at this one. So hopefully you're able to access this now. If not, I'll extend the time. I'll extend the time on that, so you can keep adding to that while we're looking at it, and it'll make my job more difficult because it'll keep dancing around the screen. But we'll reveal some of those things that we've popped up on here. And so the size will change if people are adding the same thing more than once. It will show it as a larger side of Word, but we're using slightly different phrases here, so it's coming up differently. So thinking about institutional resources, cost constraints, that might be institutional cost constraints or individual cost constraints, I guess, to the individuals being able to take part in field work. Large classes, someone's popped up on there, so thinking about how we might be doing field teaching, as we may have large numbers within our classes. You don't want 100 students hanging up the side of a hill learning about it, or damaging a particularly precious peatland environment. Someone's popped up on there thinking about time series changes, so we can travel backwards in time using virtual fieldwork, perhaps. Look at how things might change. We've got in here wet weather fallback. I know that if you've got a group of students on the side of the hill and it's terrible weather, there's not much learning going on, as everyone's trying to survive and keep warm and dry. So yeah, thinking about how, when you might not be able to safely access a site or have good learning going on, how you might be able to use a virtual environment for that. We've got in here as well people thinking about carbon emissions and sustainability. So removing the need for large groups of people to travel to particular sites. We've got people thinking about access. We've also got people using other terms, so thinking about EDI challenges, and making sure that people can all take part in and access the fieldwork learning and teaching activities that we've brought into degree programs that we want all our students to be able to take part in. We've also got people thinking about after the fieldwork, so we've got reflection and looking back after the trip on here as well. So thinking about you might be going off and doing a field trip, and then providing students with the opportunity to revisit the site, maybe when it isn't raining so much, or once they've learned a bit more about it and want to come back and look at it. So lots of really interesting reasons that you've popped up there, and I'll try and pop these word clouds into the slides and see if it's possible to share these around with you afterwards, because it's nice to hear what other people are thinking as well, and reflect on that after the session. So lots of really nice really nice examples of why we might need virtual fieldwork in there. And lots of it around ensuring that everybody can actually access various types of the fieldwork. I'll just go back to the main screen, and I will now pass you over to Liz.
Yes, so we put together some reflections on the need for virtual fieldwork, although I think a lot of these have come across already in the word cloud. And as Naomi said earlier, when we say our reflections, it really reflects the community discussions that we've had. So they're not necessarily just unique to what me and Naomi are thinking, but also kind of what we've read and what we discussed with colleagues as well. So a lot of you have mentioned that the need for virtual fieldwork, some of that is because of equality, diversity, and inclusion. That can be about preparing students for an in-person trip to help alleviate anxiety or concerns about a trip. Or it could be around enabling students to access information about a field site in different ways. So when we think of a field trip, we're often communicating, often battling against the wind and the weather to communicate what we're looking at in an environment, whereas a virtual field trip enables us to communicate that through a video or through text or a combination of different things. So students are able to access their learning in a different way and not just that one time in the field moment, and allows for sort of consolidation of learning, reflection of learning, and studying at your own pace. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that it can help increase inclusion, even if the intention is that you are still going out into the field, so the virtual field is not a replacement. There are certainly ways that it can enhance equality, diversity inclusion. However, saying that, although often our intention of a virtual field trip is not to completely replace an in-person trip, it is a viable alternative for those unable to attend. And this can be for known reasons, but life happens. You know, people can get ill, break their legs a week before the trip or something, and so having these alternatives and viable alternatives to a trip again helps to keep our education open and accessible to all. Some of you mentioned about sustainability. So obviously, we're obviously really concerned about the carbon cost of trips. So it may be that as a department, there may be a decision that you're not going to be flying people around the globe, but we still need to be able to educate our students about these global issues. We can't just keep focusing on UK issues. It might be that we need to be incorporating these more global issues. So having a virtual field trip to engage students with global issues is one way that we can reduce carbon, but still keep educating beyond just kind of a Eurocentric view of the world. So there's that element, but also there's the sustainability element of not putting a lot of pressure on field sites. Some field sites are very, very popular with a lot of universities. We all go to the same places, and that puts a lot of pressure on some of these sensitive sites. So by having a virtual alternative might mean that we can alleviate some pressure on some of these sensitive or special scientific interest sites as well. And some of you already mentioned about the cost of trips. Higher education is struggling financially at the moment, and there may be pressure on departments to reduce field provision. That may be the case. It may not be the case. I'm not quite sure. It depends on departments, I think. But yeah, again, having that alternative it still enables people to be engaging students in the field environment. Something that perhaps wasn't reflected on so much was around sort of time, flexibility, and reliability. So virtual field trips are a way to make maximum use of time in the field. So if you can give a lot of information prior to going into a field trip, it means that students are a little bit more up and running. If you can show students what sort of experiments they're going to be doing or any field work they're going to be doing before you go into the field, it means there's less time demonstrating it in the field and more time going out and collecting the samples that they need. So it can be quite an effective use of time and resources, get students up and running a little bit more. And again, it provides that flexibility for how students engage with their learning, and it's a reliable way of providing education when we have things like issues like pandemics and climate events like storms, floods and wildfires. One of the other things that was quite good for virtual fieldwork is it can be quite novel. So you can travel through time. You can go back through, Google Earth. You can go back through time. Digimaps, we can go back through time. And so we can have that element of looking at how a field site has evolved and changed through time. Which you can't necessarily do in the field. I mean, I guess as paleo people, we try to, but you have the tools and the images that you are able to incorporate, and perhaps help students visualize that a little bit more effectively than trying to get them to make that connection in the field. So we can use things like overlays, and also acknowledge seasonal differences. You might be going to if you went over to a meadow site from April, it might look very, very different in October. So we can communicate that and show that visually in these virtual environments. And again, virtual field trips enable us to connect teaching to the field instantly. So it could be that you might be talking to students about glaciers, and then you could go on a glacial field trip immediately after by using your virtual tools. Whereas obviously in the UK, we can't really go pop out in an afternoon to go and visit a glacier. So it's a way to connect teaching to the field instantly rather than having these delays. And as we said before, sort of these plan Bs, pandemics, wars. So Ukraine are currently using virtual field trips as they are unable to go out into the field. And then we have climatic events that are preventing us to go out in the field too. Naomi, do you want to go to the next slide? So I think you've reflected a lot of those things in that word cloud. One thing that we wanted to emphasize today is this idea of different types of virtual field trips. And we put together this image for a book chapter to kind of communicate that there's lots of different ways that we can develop and have virtual field trips. So it could, and that very much depends on the learning outcome. So one of the big emphasis of today is really thinking about what are you using your virtual field trip for? What are the learning outcomes you want from the virtual field trip? So it might be that the purpose of your virtual field trip is about preparing students to go out in the field. It might be about familiarizing them with the environment before they go out to help alleviate anxiety, for example, or to help them visualize where they're going to be staying. So it might be that your virtual field trip is actually quite passive. So there's lots of photographs, maybe with some annotations and maybe some videos, maybe some things for the students to navigate themselves independently. And so that's quite passive, but it's still reaching the outcomes that you want. Your outcomes are about preparing students before they go into the field. So it doesn't need to be any more technical or any more active than that. But there are more active ways that we can use virtual field trips. So it could be that we have 360-degree images with accompanying worksheets. So the students are having to answer questions, are having to maybe engage in quizzes. It might be that students engage with a live stream of an in-person trip and are able to ask and answer questions, have that two-way flow of communication. So there's a little bit ways that we can make virtual field trips more active depending on the learning outcomes. And it could be that virtual field trips can be even more active, where we are giving students data from the field or asking students to identify things in the field. Might be looking at a video where they where you are gathering data for them, but they have to record that data, they have to analyze that data, and they have to present that data. All in a virtual environment, but again, that's much more active and engaged in learning. So one of the key messages I think from today we're hoping that you're going to get across is that the type of virtual field trip that you develop depends very much on the learning outcome, and you need to be reflecting on the learning outcomes and the learning objectives before designing virtual field trips. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to say on that slide, Naomi. And we thought it'd be useful to show some examples. So I noticed that someone mentioned in the chat that I think they were very familiar with the Virtual Glaciers website put together by Des McDougall, who's on the call. I'm just going to pop it in the chat box so you can see. And this has an example of a field trip which can have variable levels of interactivity. So some of the virtual field trips here are just 360 images where students can become can kind of navigate around the field trip, around the sites, have that familiarization of where they're going. yeah, just have a really like a look and see of what's going on. But there's also more interactive elements where I've put the link to the Mori Valley, where Des has put together a worksheet engaging students in identifying and discussing key features that they're seeing. So there's a little bit more active, engaging students to look at the environment a little bit more closely and answer questions on that, and then engaging a little bit more with their learning. And something that I've done with the virtual glaciers field trip, so as well as working for the University of York, I also work for the Open University, is I've used the VR Glaciers website as a way of getting students to think about field design. So if they were to be going to this field environment, what questions would they be asking? What hypotheses would they be coming up with? And then thinking about how they would design a safe field trip in this environment. So not really talking necessarily about glaciers, but using this as a platform, discussing field design in the environment. So there's lots of different ways that we can use this as a resource for a virtual field trip. I think that's everything I want to say on that slide, Naomi. There's another example. So these are just kind of examples I thought showed you the different levels and the different learning outcomes that we can get from virtual field trips. And this is from Teach the Earth, teaching with online field experiences. So there's a collection of virtual field trips available. I will pop the web link on here as well, just while I'm remembering. And what I wanted to kind of emphasize on this example is that it starts with sort of a Google Earth tour with embedded hyperlinks, text, photos, figures, and videos. So in a way, a little bit passive because they're doing on a tour, but it very much builds towards becoming a little bit more active. They've got to do some geological mapping, understanding the rock sequences in the environment. They do some geomorphic mapping using LiDAR imagery, and then they've got to put all of that together as in the activity to make some decisions about sort of the management and the infrastructure that is needed for this environment. So it starts kind of quite passive, looking at, with like lots of reading, lots of videos for students to watch, and then it becomes increasingly more active. So there's lots of different ways that we can use virtual field trips. And again, it very much goes back to the learning outcomes that you want. If the learning outcome is very much about just familiarization, then it will be passive. But if you want students to be gathering data and things like that, we can design virtual field trips to be doing that too. Okay, next slide. So we thought it might be useful as part of today to create a collection of virtual field trips that people have used, have perhaps engaged with. So Naomi has put together a Padlet, which you can get from this QR code. So if there's any field trips that you have used yourself, are happy to kind of share with the community, that'd be really, really good. And we can share this Padlet as part of the resources as an output of these seminars. So I'll just give you, I guess, about a minute, well, maybe 30 seconds or so, just to get access to the Padlet, and then maybe we can be populating it as we kind of go along.
Liz, do you have the link? Could you pop that in the chat, because it's hidden on my other screen?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we're having to use slightly different platforms today because we had problems logging in. There we go. So yeah, if you can use the Padlet to populate any examples, that'd be really, really nice and really, really good for people to share. Because one of the best ways to learn about virtual field trips is to have a look at various different ones. Okay, so there's lots of different types. The type will depend on the learning outcomes that you want your students to get from them. And so when planning a virtual field trip, I think the starting point, or the starting point that we think would be good, is to think about what is the purpose and the activities you want the students to be doing. So what activities, if any, will you be engaging the students with? And then thinking about how will you actually set this up in the virtual environment. Obviously, there are going to be limitations around sort of if you wanted to get students to do data collection, then that's going to need a lot more thought about how you're going to set that up actually in the virtual field environment. How are you actually going to get students to be actively collecting data? Are you going to need some high resolution images of quadrats? Are you going to need to be videoing a timer, videoing a ruler and measurements and things like that. So really thinking at the very start, what is the purpose of the virtual field trip and what activities are required, if any, in order for you to meet those learning outcomes. And then thinking about if you are going to have to do some filming and photography, then thinking about the shots. So for example, I had a placement student helping me develop some virtual field trips last summer, and she was a film and television student, and she was excellent at making me think about what shots will I need, which close-up images of the equipment would we need, what wide images would we need of the landscape. So there's a lot more planning involved than I initially thought, because yeah, we needed to make sure whilst we were out there, we were planning which shots we needed, whether we needed close-ups, wide shots, sort of middle range shots, and so on. So before going out and doing any virtual fieldwork, there's a lot of planning that needs to be undertaken. Again, the student who helped me with the virtual field trips that we were creating asked me to create a script so that she could understand exactly kind of what we were trying to explain, what we were trying to show. And again, that got me thinking very much around what it was that I wanted the students to understand from the virtual field trip, and get me to think about what it was that was needed in order to get that understanding across. So the purpose of those films was to really demonstrate some of the field experiments that we do with the students, because we wanted to use those as a preparatory tool for our students, but we were also sharing them with some colleagues in Ukraine who were unable to go out and show students how to use the field equipment, so that they had a way to show students the experimental design that we were showing in terms of river flow and leveling. It might be that you want some soundscapes. It might be that you are going to incorporate the Merlin app to record bird species in the environment, or just some general sounds of rivers flowing, just to get that extra feel for the environment. And the key thing here is making sure there's time for editing, because it takes a long time to edit, making sure everything's captioned, and so on. So on top of that, so not only are you having to think about your teaching purpose and the activities, thinking about any filming and photography in the shots, but also we have the normal field trip preparation. So what kit are you going to need? What field kit are you going to need? But also what filming kit will you need? We need to make sure we have risk assessments. It might be that you need ethics, depending on if you're triple SI, maybe you might need more ethics, or it might be that if you were going out and surveying people as part of your virtual field trip, then obviously that will need ethics. Obviously you'll need permission for the sites and need consideration of the weather too. Obviously you need a little bit more consideration of weather if you're going out filming, because you don't want to get all your cameras and things set up. And there's also the consideration of barriers and challenges. What are the costs going to be for you in terms of time? What are the costs in terms of money as well? Are you going to have the money to go out and collect the data? What platforms do you have access to? Are you going to need to buy a platform, or you can make use of free platforms? And later on in this series, there'll be colleagues showing you different examples of different platforms that you can use to create virtual field trips. It doesn't always need to be a paid for platform, and it doesn't need to be really, really expensive. So one way to sort of think about planning a virtual field trip is also to do a storyboard. So this is a storyboard that I set up for the film and television student who is helping us create our virtual field trip. And like I say, it really got me thinking about what shots we needed, what equipment I needed as well, what aspects of the equipment I needed to be zoomed in on. So for example, with the level, I needed to make sure that we had the different, like the mirror and the spirit level elements of the leveling equipment shown. and also the staff as well, and how the staff works, and explaining how the staff works. So storyboard is a really good way of kind of making sure that you think very sequentially about what you need, and what shots you might need within that. I'm going to go over the next one. So this was for filming. And then I put together, this is theoretical virtual field trip. This is an actual one, but I was thinking, well, if I had to convert my third year field trip into a completely virtual field trip, how would I go about doing it? So my third year field trip is a landscape restoration focused field trip, looking at landscape restoration in the Lake District area. And I was thinking, well, what information would I need to ensure that the students had in order to be able to engage with the information that we go through? So it might be that I need some 360 images of the sites and some text box information. It might be that I get students to engage with historical maps and images so that they can see how the sites have changed over time, and how what we might be trying to restore these sites to. It might be that I need to be making sure that students have access to journal articles, and trying to link the journal articles into my virtual field trips. And it might be that there's some activities that I want students to engage with. So, for example, I came up with an infiltration activity where we have one video that explains the infiltration experimental setup, and then the following videos show the infiltration activity, which will require students to record the key information that they need. So they need to record the volume that I've used, the time it's taken for that volume to go through. And then I thought, well, maybe we could have some quizzes and some formative feedback to check that they've done their calculations correctly and interpreted the information correctly. And things like that. So this is kind of how I imagined how I could convert it into a completely virtual field trip, and thinking about some of the activities I want the students to do, but also some of the images and the information that I would need to make sure I had to ensure that the students got the same information that they would get if they were there and on site. So storyboarding is a good approach to the planning side of virtual field trips. Firstly, thinking about the learning outcomes, and then the planning around those learning outcomes. So I think I'm going to hand over to Naomi, who's going to introduce the activity that we're going to get you to do, which you might be able to guess what it might be based on what I've just said.
Yeah, smoothly linking from the introduction to storyboarding to the activity on storyboarding. We're going to ask that you spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms, probably be 3 to 4 people in a breakout room, and that you spend a little bit of time thinking about an activity perhaps, or a field trip. So it could be a field activity, or it could be a visit to a site, or however you want to do it. Bearing in mind, we are an interdisciplinary group, so there might be a little bit of discussion about what activity you want to do. The breakout rooms have been assigned automatically, so you might be with people with different disciplinary interests and experiences. So we're going to ask you to spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms. I think we've probably got about 10 to 15 minutes for this activity. I just need to check the timings. Maybe should we start with 10 minutes, Liz, and see how we go with that? So 10 minutes for the activity once we start. Liz has got hopefully a link for a Google document that's just popped into the chat. So we've got 4 breakout rooms we'll have, and you'll see that we've cunningly labelled the spare slides on the document that Liz has popped in the chat, rooms 1 to 4. So we'll pop you into breakout rooms, and I'll set a timer so that we know how long we've got in the breakout rooms. And we're going to ask you to come up with this virtual field trip or virtual field activity you'd like to create. We're going to ask you to sort of think about the purpose and the learning outcome of the trip. So remembering that it's important what your learning outcomes, what you want the students to be able to do or know or achieve by the end of it, will influence what you're going to do on the trip. So think about whether you want it to be more of a passive activity, whether you want it to be more active in terms of learning and reflecting back to some of those things Liz mentioned earlier. And then we've got some storyboard slides. Each slide has got a box with 9 different boxes in it. You don't need to fill it. We just wanted to give you some space to pop your thoughts down. So you don't need to fill all 9 boxes if you're happy once you've filled fewer, that's absolutely fine. We just wanted to ensure that there was space. So within your rooms, you might want to assign someone to be typing, or just make sure that you all know who's doing what, so you don't end up deleting and overwriting on your room. So let me just check how we've got, I'm just possibly going to move one person rooms because we've just had someone drop out. So we've got a room of 2 at the moment. So we should have 4 rooms of 3 now. So I'm just going to send you all off to your breakout rooms. I'll set a timer so that you'll know what's going on. And Liz and I will keep an eye on the time anyway and message you. So hopefully the breakout rooms will work. Or taking part, the recording is started again. So Liz and I could see lots of typing going on the Google Sheets while you were in your room, in your rooms, on lots of cool topics. So hopefully you can still see these slides, which are your it's not going to work, is it?
We can see. Oh, yeah, room.
There we go.
No.
So we've got lots of different activities, and we're not going to ask you to feedback on the ideas that you had, but we'd like you just to share some thoughts about the experiences of thinking it through in this way, and sort of just a little bit of feedback around your thoughts around this kind of process. So if anyone from one of the rooms is sort of happy just to share some thoughts about what they thought of doing this in this way, or how they found the activity, you can do it in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing it like that, or just either stick a real hand up or a virtual hand up. Just take a couple of minutes for that. So just zooming through the different projects, so some really nice different types of project and field activities coming through here, which just shows what happens when you get a nice interdisciplinary bunch together. Jane?
Yes, following on from that, in our group we did the soil moss ecology and microplastics, I think it's called. And something that was very interesting to me that came out of our discussion was the idea that students' discussion could actually generate some qualitative data, that the students are actively generating and looking at their own data through that qualitative source, which they can then use to tie all the field trip stuff back to their own lived experience, even if they haven't actually had the experience of falling into the salt marsh, to sort of help give them buy-in. And but the idea that it's qualitative data as well as just a hook to get them to think the practical's worth doing.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting, isn't it? The thought of that, bringing in their experiences as qualitative data, because that's something we often forget about when we're thinking about the virtual replacement, is how we often have a focus on the quantitative rather than thinking about the qualitative. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to share anything or any thoughts? Silence. Well, we hope you found it a useful activity just to have an initial thought of what the process is, and thinking about the aims of the activity, the learning outcomes, and then having the sort of interdisciplinary groupings is really nice, because people can bring different ideas and different aspects to a field trip, as we might find if we were teaching with colleagues from different disciplines outside in the environment or in the classroom. So we just got a couple more slides that we'd like to cover. So I'll just pass back on to Liz for the next bit.
Yeah, just before we move on, just picking up on Jane's point as well, is also thinking about if you want your virtual field trip to kind of marry up with an in-person field trip. So it might be that you have a group of students who aren't able to go in the field. Could you plan a virtual field trip where they're collecting data that people out in the field aren't collecting? So maybe that historical data they might be collecting, or they might be collecting information on, I don't know, funding for landscape restoration or replanting projects, so that when the in-person trip come back, they're contributing something new and adding data rather than kind of just trying to do this alternative. So I have sort of done that with one of my field trips last year. Someone was unable to come, so I set her with a task that was more desk-based, so that when her group came back with their field data, they were able to marry up and have a much bigger data and a much fuller data set, really, than those who were just kind of collecting data in the field. So there's also that way of thinking about virtual field trips, is trying to marry the two groups of students up potentially to create bigger data sets and a more fuller picture of what you're talking about. That was just something I remembered. I thought was something to think about as well when we're designing and thinking about the purpose of the virtual field trip. Can we, rather than just them being a replacement, that they're actually enhancing fieldwork learning for both groups. Okay, so just a few more slides. So thinking about virtual field trips, we also need to be thinking about digital accessibility. Digital accessibility and sort of the variability of digital accessibility definitely came up during COVID, with people having different access to equipment, different internet speeds. Those people in more rural locations might not have such good internet as those in more urban environments, although sometimes those in urban environments still don't have great internet speed. Access to technology is a big thing. So if you're having a virtual field trip as an alternative, are you going to need to book a computer room on campus to ensure that everybody has access to the equipment, or are you assuming that people have access to the equipment that they need? There's also, we need to think about digital accessibility in terms of the fonts that we're using. Are we using platforms that are screen reader friendly? We need to think color contrasts. How are we able to make sure that if we've got a quadrat, making sure that they're really crisp images. If we've got photographs of quadrats, making sure they're really crisp images, thinking about the colors and differentiation of colors. Thinking about reliance on mouse or keyboards, which can be a challenge for people. So there's all sorts of digital accessibility that we need to be thinking about, particularly if we're thinking of virtual field trips as an alternative, or creating more inclusive field trips. We then don't want to create a load of barriers through the technology that we're using or the fonts that we're using. Something to think about is how long will you do the virtual field trips? Is it to be completed in one go, or is it to be completed over a week? And something to think about as well is equivalency. So if it is an alternative for a trip, how to make sure your virtual field trip is equivalent in terms of workload. Because often when we're in the field, we've got travel time, we've got lunch breaks, we've got faffing around time. And so actually the amount of work we sometimes get done isn't that much. So making sure that you're not then packing the virtual alternative with absolutely tons, when in reality in the field, there's all this faff time and so on. So trying to think about how we make sure there's a nice balance of workloads. And then thinking about that sense of community, how can we create a sense of communities? Obviously in field trips are an amazing time for students to get to know one another, and break down some barriers, but also they can be a problem in terms of students who struggle to work in groups. So do we need to create a sense of community, or are we trying to find an alternative way for people to access learning who feel less comfortable in groups? So this is just a question rather than giving you a particular answer. But I think the key point here is that making sure that when we're planning a virtual alternative or a virtual field trip, is making sure that we are not creating barriers in the process or excess barriers in the process. So I think that's everything I want to say on that one. So we're coming to a close for the session today. We had another mentee that I think Naomi is just going to flip over to, is to think, we just wanted you to reflect on one thing that you would take away from today's session. So this could be a reflection, or it could be a question, or it could be an action that you're going to take from today, or an element of your discussion that you had in your breakout rooms that you want to report or bring back to the session. So yeah, one thing that you will take away from today's session. So Naomi's got a timer on there, so I will be quiet and let you answer that question. Okay, so Naomi's done the big reveal. So, yeah, it's good that the first one is the importance of learning outcomes. That was great, because that was probably one of the things that me and Naomi discussed the most, was linking these virtual field trips back to learning outcomes. I think so. It's the temptation can be really to get a bit sidetracked with the cool stuff that you can do with a virtual field trip, but always remembering and coming back to the learning outcomes and thinking about what is it exactly I want my students to do or understand. And sometimes you don't need to do the really exciting technically difficult stuff if your learning outcomes are very kind of very simple. I want them to understand this, or I want to show them that. I'm glad that the storyboarding was helpful as well. It does really get you to think about the process of what you need at each stage. Again, it'd be very difficult to go out into the field without really thinking about exactly what you want the students to see and images that you need. You'd end up going backwards and forwards, I think. I think they're the key things that have come up, so that's really good. Just to pick up a question in the chat, Althea's asked about good practice in the virtual field trip storyboard to cover EDI issues students may face in the field. I don't know if there's any like evidence of when to do it, or like where the best practices would be to do it. But I think something that we've discussed as a community kind of over the years is that making sure that the plan for any in-person trips are really, really clear, making clear when there's going to be toilet stops, when you anticipate they're going to be lunch stop, having all that information clearly presented at some point in your field trip planning really helps overcome some of the EDI issues. I think students just need to know that there's going to be toilets at this point, or that they're going to be able to eat at this point, for various reasons. So I think as long as it's somewhere in there and it's part of that very clear plan, I think that's my key feeling. I don't know if Naomi, you want to chip in with anything or respond to that?
I just agree. Letting people know the information, because people often forget to tell people, so it's been planned in but forget to communicate.
But yeah, as to where to put it, I guess it all depends. Depends on what you're putting together. And then someone asked about risk assessments. I guess again that varies by department. I always just put my risk assessment up as it is, and point students to it. But whether you want to make that a bit more interactive as part of a virtual field trip, I guess that's up to you and how you want to communicate that to your students and what's appropriate for your students. Yeah, quiz for risk assessment is a really good idea, actually. So that's the end of today. So this one is very much about the pedagogy and planning. So the next session in the series will be run by Linda York at Bangor University, who's going to be looking at making the most of digital approaches. That will be on Wednesday, the 24th of September, 2 till 3:30 p.m. Althea's popped up, so I don't know if you want to add something about the next session.
No, not really. Just to say thank you for everyone for coming along. I hope you'll consider coming to one or more of the others if you haven't already signed up. And thank you very much to Naomi and Liz for sharing what they've learned, because I still feel so new to really thinking about things in this way. There's lots of thanks coming in. I guess, so I think I said at the beginning, so the paleoecology group in British Ecological Society, we do have a YouTube channel, which you'll probably not be able to find, because the workshops we've done before, we've recorded and made things available, but we've only made them available to the people who came to the workshops because they were paid. So we'll have to set this up, and I'll get your contact details from the BES from when you registered for this workshop. So we'll send you the link to the video as soon as it's up and ready, and then we'll make that, put a notice of that if it's not somewhere on our webpage or somewhere in one of our newsletters, just so you and others can find them, and hopefully you'll be able to share them if you found them useful as well. So I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Shall I end? Do you want to stop recording and I'll end?
Yeah, I'll Oh, why does the button disappear just when you want to do something?